My name is Anne van Riel, and I am responsible for sustainable finance for ING in the Americas. I think everybody's still picking seats. So, first of all, thank you all for coming. I think we have a very interesting panel tonight on the building blocks for the circular economy. And I'd like to especially thank our host for this evening, the Earth Institute Research Program, and also co-sponsor of this panel event, as well as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, basically the global thought leader on this topic, circular economy. I don't know how many people of you have seen this over the summer, but I saw a video of a big wave of plastic basically inundating the beaches of Dominican Republic. And it was the first time that I saw this and understood the impact of the collective waste we're producing. And if you look at this, this was only a fraction of what ends up of plastic in the oceans. Per year, 8 million tons of plastic waste it ends up in the oceans. And this is, a staggering number, but it's not even the most staggering number. Since 1950s, when plastic was basically introduced as one of the key elements, more than 9 billion tons, so that's a ton per person living on this planet, has been produced. And most of that is still around, either filling landfills or the oceans, because plastic doesn't decompose. And I don't know, I don't know if you know, but how much of plastic is recycled, do you think? A number? Well, actually, it's 9, so it's a little bit more in the US. The US is a little bit worse than other countries. In Europe, they recycle 30, and in China, 25%. But it's really nowhere near a number where it's sustainable. So we really have to rethink our business models and not have a model with make, and waste, but more a model of reduce, reuse, and then recycle. And that's exactly where the circular economy comes in. And circularity is about much more than just recycling. There's different business models, and one of them is the share platform, product per use. And examples are really everywhere in this economy. We have an example of Philips, who used to sell light bulbs, and now they're selling light as a service. There's also a company called Lollyware. They are looking at alternatives for plastic packaging and using seaweed. And just last week, I had a coffee with a woman of the Queen of Raw, and she is actually matching buyers and sellers of wasted and excess fabric that sits in warehouses. And she's using the blockchain as a technology to match those global buyers and sellers. So there's really a lot of business initiatives and new things that are having an impact on the economy of the future. And this is also exactly why ING is interested in this. ING has sustainability at the core of its strategy. One of the reasons is that we know that sustainability is a key to success, and we want to finance the leaders of tomorrow's economy. And that's also why we are actively thinking about circular economy and how we can contribute to that business model. It doesn't, it takes more than just finance, so it takes technology, design, businesses. We all have to think about how we can make this work. So I'm really happy that we have the panel today that we have. And I would like to introduce you to Jean-Charles, Jean-Charles Guinot, and he's from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, our co-sponsor of tonight. He will tell you a little bit more on the circular economy and also about our panelists of tonight. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Just want to check how these things work. So yeah, I work at the MacArthur Foundation. So it's a foundation that has been created roughly 9 years ago in UK, and the sole purpose of the foundation is to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So this is all what we do. And we have a staff of around 100 people are based in UK, Europe, and Brazil to work on those topics. So the first thing is to know is what is a circular economy and why would you care? I think some of you may have heard the term circular economy, some of you may not, but I think it's important first to understand what it is, so we are all on the same page before the panel. But first of all, it's good to understand in which economy we are now, and it's more a linear economy. So if you look at the economy nowadays, you just take material out of the ground, you create component out of it, you then ship it anywhere in the world to create product. Then when you have product, you ship it somewhere else in the world to sell it. And when they're sold, you use it a few times, and that they either end up in landfill or are burned to energy, or a bit are actually recycling. And there is some issue with that way of thinking. The first one is the production relies a lot on virgin material, and they are finite, so some of them are not going to be there for too long. Then it does create a lot of waste. So if you look at it, not many products have been thought with a design perspective. How can you design products so they can last longer? So it does create a lot of waste, that issue with landfill that everyone is aware of. Also, it's a huge waste in terms of the financial aspect. So if you look, for instance, at the FMCG sector, so it's the fast-moving consumer goods, looking at packaged food, drinks, etc. So it's really cheap products that are shipped pretty quickly. There is an average of $2.6 trillion that are wasted and end up every year either in landfill or are burned for energy. So it's a huge number. I mean, even if you could divert 2% of it, you will already be a millionaire or billionaire. So it's something to think about. It's not only about it has a huge impact on the environment, on the earth, but also there is a value to be captured and a financial waste that is created by that. Also, if you look at how we design product, most of the time they have one single need or goal, and they don't really fit in the whole system. So there is like few examples. If you look at the economy nowadays, it's hugely wasteful. You look, for instance, at the food sector, there is only 70% of the food that is actually consumed, the rest is wasted. The one that I find really astonishing is in relation with car. If you look at a car, so first, it's pretty expensive. When you buy a car, it's created for 5 seats, but most of the time it carries only 1.5 people. So why having so big cars? And also, in terms of the own life of a car, only 5% of the time is used to be driven. After that, it just sits there in a car park or etc. But even with that, you just see cities around the US or anywhere in the world, you have huge car park, you have huge highway and etc. So, if you look at the system itself, it's not really well designed, and it's a waste of space and etc. So it's about thinking all of those different aspects. And the last thing I wanted to say about the economy we're living in, it's that it's important to treat the symptom and not the cause. So we don't really have to go into details, but this is just the flow of plastic packaging every year. And if you look at it, after 40 years of banging on recycling, actually from plastic packaging to plastic packaging, you have only 2% that is recycled worldwide. So it's just a really small number. The rest is either burned, going to landfill, or going into the ocean. So it's great if you're able to clean the beach, but in a way, it's not going to stop the flow coming in. You're always going to have the same issue. So the idea is how can you treat the symptom first and not the cause. A good metaphor will be if you have a leak faucet in your home, will you just keep mopping at the floor, or will you fix it up? So it's thinking in a different way. So if you think about the circular economy, this is kind of how we see it or how we talk about it. It might be, for some of you, might be a bit far. You don't have to read everything. The idea is like if you go through a straight line, this is where we are now. It's this kind of linear economy when you take material off the ground, you have the manufacturer, the producer, and the service, and you end up in landfill. And the idea of the circular economy is how can you loop that in different aspects. So the one on the right is on the technical side, so it's looking at any like electronics or etc. So you look, for instance, at a phone, and the idea is how you can keep the value with those loops. So instead of, once you've used your phone, if your screen is broken, if you repair it, it's still going to, now in those days, a phone is probably worth $1,000. If you repair the screen, it's still going to be worth like $800 or something like that. Then if you don't need it, you can always, have a second use by someone else. So you just sell it on eBay or any other platform. Again, you can still get, $500 out of it. Then if there is the battery not working, in that case, you have company that specialize that will take your phone, dismantle it, and remanufacture the part that are still important. In that case, you can still sell it for like $200. But if you just recycle it, and we think recycling is a solution, but it's really the solution, the last resource solution. If you just recycle it and just end up having just a bit of copper and gold, you probably get $50 out of it. So the question is also how can you get the most value of the product that are already in the economy. And on the biological side, so on the left side, it's looking at anything about food. So if you look at how the food system is nowadays, you grow a lot of food and a lot is wasted before it comes to our mouth. And after that, even when we have food waste, it doesn't link back to the soil to be able to regenerate the soil. So we end up with, it's kind of broken. The idea is, you can use food waste, so as fertilizer, but also as compost or also as biogas. You can also look at cascading. It's what we call, for instance, a T-shirt. A T-shirt can be used as a T-shirt, then can be sold as second-hand. If it's not needed as a T-shirt anymore, you can just use it as into armchair or a sofa. And then the third use will be you can use it as insulation into a house. So it's just looking and thinking differently of one product and how it can have different life across its time. So if you have I know this is quite theoretical, and I'm sure the panelists will go more in details about specific activity on the sector. But if there is three things you have to remember about the circular economy, is the first one is how can you think, stop and think first how you design products so they can either last longer, be reused, be remanufactured, and really as the last resort you think about recycling, because this is where you have the least value. And then once those products are in the economy, is how can you keep them for longer? So you have different business models. So when you can lease, now you can lease car, you can lease your phone. The idea is like the company keep the material. In that case, when it's broken, they can switch it, but keep it in the economy at the longest time possible. And the third aspect is really looking at how, on the biological side, how can you regenerate natural system? Like feeding back into the soil and regeneration and CO2 capturation. So that's it for the circular economy. Briefly about the MacArthur Foundation, we do work in different work streams. The first one is business and government. The idea is how you can catalyze activity across the globe. ING is a member of the innovation platform we have on that. The idea is how you can combine city and corporation to create some collaboration projects. We then work a lot on insight and analysis. It is how we got all those numbers and those little sketch. And then what is important is also in terms of education. So we partner with many universities across the globe to inspire the new generation and also give tools to the teacher that want to teach on the topic. So that's it for me. Before I finish, I just would like to introduce to Steve, he's going to be the panelist for the panel, from Earth Institute. He's the director of the research program for sustainability, policy and management. Thank you.
I'm Steve Cohen, and I, as you heard, I'm the director of the research program in sustainability policy and management. I also direct master's programs in environmental science and policy and sustainability management. And we have with us today a really excellent panel of experts on this circular economy. We're going to walk around the stage several times to demonstrate what we mean by circular. First, Anne Van Riel, who you've already heard from at the beginning of the evening, the head of sustainability finance at ING in the Americas. She's responsible for promoting sustainable transactions and expanding green financing and KPI-linked loan products within this region. You're going to have to tell me what the KPI stands for. Faith LeGendre is a circular economy solutions expert at Cisco Systems, where she spent over a decade serving over 155 clients worldwide. She also serves as an inclusion and collaboration ambassador for the Cisco program. Seated next to her is a member of our faculty, but Stephanie Kersten-Johnston, who's the Director of Sustainability Business at Heineken USA, and also teaches in the Sustainability Management Program our spectacular course on the circular economy. And she taught that for the first time last spring, and she's going to teach it again this spring. And I'm delighted she's with us. And finally, at the very end, Tom Kennedy is a principal at the independent firm Arup. Am I pronouncing that right? Arup, okay, which specializes in the built environment, and he's also currently leading the circular economy business in the Americas and is Arup's global leader of civil engineering. So I have a few questions to ask these folks, and we're going to take it to about 7 o'clock, and then we're going to all be available, I hope, to chat informally in the back on some refreshments and wine and things like that. So I'm going to sort of play Oprah here. This is not going to be that formal. And I'm not running for president, I guarantee you. So what I want is the panel, we'll start with you, Tom, and work our way down.
Sure.
You just heard one definition of the circular economy. Now, in my field of academia, there's never two people who agree on any concepts. So I'd just like to hear if you have additions or alternative explanations that you give when you think about the circular economy. And I want everybody in the panel to give us their spin, if you will, on the circular economy.
Sure. So I think, JC and Ellen MacArthur Foundation nail it in the breadth and depth. But in terms of the way I present it to the folk that I talk to and our client base, they're interested in, well, okay, what does it mean? So the easiest terms I've found is to say, well, you're okay with trading commodities, so view waste as a commodity. And you wouldn't sell a commodity for the lowest dollar value you could. You'd sell it for the highest dollar value you could. And that's essentially the same principles of circular economy, is to keep all of the resources that you have in the highest possible value circle that you can.
Okay, Stephanie?
Yeah, so I'm going to go all academic on you. That's my job. But no, I think just to add to those thoughts on circular economy, there's a really important economy piece to the circular economy. People often talk about the circularity piece. It's a really appealing concept. It's really neat and tidy, but the economy piece is also a really important part of that. And a lot of the work that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have done is set the basis for a real upheaval, frankly, in the economy to change the system that we've been operating on and the incentives and structures we have in our economy that perpetuate the systems that we've built. So as well as being around, making sure that we get the highest value for things and we keep materials and resources in their highest use all the time, it's also about changing some of the fundamental structures in the economy that perpetuate the systems we've built, I would say.
Okay, Faith, would you add to that?
It's building on what they said. We have to do this on the global scale because everything's connected. We have a massive supply chain that's just functioning around this globe, and what we need to do is create that global circular economy. So we have to do all of those things, but we really truly have to do it on a connected global scale.
Okay, Anne, any additions?
Hard to disagree with a professor, but I think for us, when we talk to clients about circular economy, it's really about the numbers. Sadly, that's still our economic model. What's in it for the shareholder? So I agree with you that it's about keeping the profit line and making sure that you're using your valuable resources either less or more efficiently. Yeah.
Well, yesterday here in America, we had this thing called an election, and we have this government. At least we have it in some places. We don't have it where we used to have it, like in Washington, but we still require, I think in some ways, for some of this to take place, government has a role. So I'd like the panel, any one of you, to start us off on what role does government have to play to bring about this global circular economy? We don't have a world government yet, maybe we never will, but we do have many governments, and how do you see government's role? Anybody want to?
Everybody should come together across the globe and create public policy globally that is around producer responsibility, because I think that's a trend. You see it happening, in Europe, in Canada, and different places. Mm-hmm. But until that happens, it won't really, get a lot of these organizations on board. But when you do become responsible after you sell that product, so for producer responsibility, people don't know too much about it. It's, say you sell this pen, and this pen now is produced by that manufacturer, and it's sold to me as a consumer, and I go and I use this pen. You as that company, as that manufacturer of this pen, you have a producer responsibility. And until you're held accountable for that, you might make certain decisions that lend to sending this to the landfill instead of continuing on to be responsible for your item.
So how should well, Tom, you were going to say something.
Sorry, I was just going to, I don't disagree with that at all. I think for me there's 4 reasons that we either personally or corporately or governmentally do things. There's the altruism nature of it, because it's the right thing to do. There's the shareholders want you to do it because there's cash involved. There's the market demands it, or your customers demand it. And then there's the government policy part. And the point being that government plays a role in this, and it's very important, but really it's only one of 4 strings. And we can argue about how many other strings there might be. But government is very important, but given the climate we have, and not to get political, but given the climate we have right now, you mentioned the lack of government in DC. Yeah, so we can do it without them, but we have to have everybody together and realize it's the thing that we want to do, and concentrate on the 3 other streams and hope that the government will catch up.
Well, talking about government, which is something I like to talk about, I mean, I've written about different ways government can influence private behavior. So you can have command and control regulation where you tell people you have to collect this pen. Or I can create a tax credit for you where you get paid to get the pen back. Knowing what you know about the private sector, which of those 2 approaches you think has the best chance of succeeding? Stephanie,
I think you have to do a bit of both, and I also think it's really easy for us to get caught up at a national government level,
right.
But really government at every level has to really step up and do their part and pull the levers that they have available to them in order to make a real difference. So, you know, to give an example where we've got city-based governments and they have a scope of control where they can influence waste streams in cities, for instance, that is just as important in some ways as some of the federal stuff we see going through. And so I would say both, and I know that's not a get out, I promise, but in different ways, because sometimes if the speed of innovation and incentives for innovation are not there, then there does need to be regulation to prevent things from happening. But I do think that a good balance of the 2 and trial and error around where the balance lies is
so
really
rules
critical.
And incentives.
100%, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, just to think about it from the point of view of wearing my kind of Heineken hat for a second, you know, extended producer responsibility is never going to be a favorite topic, but there needs to be some nudges in the right direction to push the innovation to allow for that to happen. So sometimes it is about the stick, and then other times it's going to be about, okay, can we create networks and incentives to drive innovation in other areas as well.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, I would just give you traffic in Manhattan. We need traffic lights, or it would be chaos. But it would be a good idea to have congestion pricing. So we put a price on that scarce space, and we might actually, we're not going to give up the traffic lights when we put in congestion pricing, and the other way around. So,
Can we sign up for that panel too?
And anything you want to add to this?
I think it's hard, and you see 2 very different models, right? In Europe, the discussion is more from a central government push as well. Here in the US, I see a lot of organizations that are interested in it. One, because their investors are asking it, or the other pushes through consumers. So I wouldn't underestimate the power that a consumer has, whether it's through the investments you want to make in your pension fund or the products that you buy. Because I think that even though in an ideal world a government could play a great role and carbon tax would be a great idea, I'm not sure it's realistic. So we have to find another way in the meantime.
No, it's an interesting question, because I think the public-private partnership is basically how this city was created. It's also how many social goods are created in a capitalist society. So the idea of mixing them, I know that California, for example, requires their pension fund is required to make sustainable investments. They're just trying to figure out what that means. So it's an interesting part of the equation. How do we get these two sectors to work together? So a lot of the talk so far has been about garbage and waste. Is this, I mean, can we develop an economy where everything is circular? I mean, is this a realistic objective? San Francisco says they have a zero waste policy. They don't include construction waste in their analysis, but okay, it's California, what do they know? But my question is this realistic? Can this be done? Or is this a dream and a goal, a sort of vision thing? Or is this something that we actually could make real? So I'm going to start at that end and work my way. I want everybody to tell me whether they think this is
I like getting the softball questions. It's really, it makes it worthwhile. So I'm a two-brain part on this, because I think, yes, it's achievable in one part, but it's going to take a lot of change. And will it be in my lifetime? I honestly don't know. I'd like to think it is, but I don't know. The other side of my brain says, well, that's great that you think that, but the reality is, let's put the small steps in place to start chipping away and take the small wins where we can, start the conversation, move it on. Things like this, the event, the education, the sharing of information, the questions and poking and asking why. Why are you not changing? What's preventing you? And working on those. And sometimes, I'll be honest with you, I don't think we know all the answers yet. So I think the goal is still out there. But as long as you've got the will to get there, the questions will come, and then you take them individually as a community, and that's how we get there.
Okay, Stephanie?
I think, just looking at it from a different angle, there's no such thing as waste, literally. I mean, we're on a closed system planet, and everything that's on it is just material in some stage of its life in circulation. So we may feel that in our lifetime or whatever that it's a very hard goal to reach, but we have to get there at some point. You know, otherwise we will cease to exist when the impacts that we're having become literally unsustainable. So, I mean, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure that JC's told this story as well many times, but the Ellen MacArthur Foundation was set up by Ellen MacArthur, who was the first woman to solar circumnavigate the globe, and she brought this idea to bear because from her perspective, when you're on a boat sailing around the ocean, you have to be a self-contained unit that has to survive for all that time and has to take all the materials and things that you need for all that time period that you're out there to survive out there. And I think that really brought for her the challenge into sharp focus. We have one planet, we have these resources, and we can't afford to be wasting things. So I think we have to, is the answer.
Okay. Faith?
To build on your comment earlier, it is both. It's the policy, but it's also the innovation. And I think we need to constantly challenge all of you see all of these accelerators popping up, and you see all of these tech labs popping up. And every time I meet with them, I try to ask them, well, do you have a judging panel that is looking for circularity in all of these different innovations? So I think we need to keep challenging all those accelerators, incubators, innovation centers to have a component of circularity inside of their center, inside of their organism, and make sure that the things that are coming out of these innovation centers are circular.
Okay, Anne?
Well, I hope so, because otherwise we'll drown in waste. But if it will be, it's not going to be easy. So innovation is one part of it. It's very important. But I think we just need to collectively probably make use with less. I mean, I remember my mom. She's a war child, so she used the lucifers and the matchsticks twice, one on one side and one on the other side. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's that generation. And I think nowadays maybe products are too cheap for what it is.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting concept when you think about is there waste or there isn't waste. I mean, the fact is, if you go down the streets of New York, People are pretty casual and careless about what they do with the things that they're eating and drinking, and they're on the subway, so they're not in a car, so they think, well, I better get plastic and paper, otherwise it'll spill all over my clothes and all that kind of thing. So part of this is actually, and I think we heard this from our opening speaker, an attitude issue, right? An issue of values and perceptions. So education, you were saying, Tom, at the beginning, was one of the things. How do you get people's values and perceptions of material to change so they think about these issues?
Again, with the softball.
The easy ones, yeah.
So I think it is. Education is really important, because unless I'm told there's a different way to do things, generally, you kind of just focus on this and you carry on, and you have to train yourself to be innovative and think all the time. Okay, now, I'm an engineer by trade, so you're driven by the requirements of building code, which is great because it's the safest low bar that you have to get through to make sure you don't kill people. But there's better ways to do it. There's better ways to reach that solution. And so that's the bit that you have to train yourself to think differently than just, this is how it's always been done, therefore all I need to do to finish this is go here. And some people have difficulty getting past that.
Right.
And so we have to help them. So that's education from an early age all the way through. And it's not just about innovation, it's about people's natural proclivity to do things how they see other people doing it. So there's an element of leading by example as education. There's an element of being open. I said it like in forums like this and saying, there's a better way. There's statistics. Now, there's a great adage that 84.72% of statistics are all made up. But there are statistics out there for all of the things that we have, all of the waste, and I think the better way to describe waste is opportunity, and sometimes we miss opportunities. And so that's the thing that we start, and having metrics for people to see, oh, maybe if I could do better. But then, that we come back to the stick element. Some people just need the stick, just need the legislation to say, this is it now, we've given you all the opportunities to do everything else. Now it's time for the greater good to come to bear.
So Stephanie, what's your perspective on value change?
Well, I'm not going to be the one to say that education doesn't matter, am I? But having said that, I do think there are only a certain portion of the community, if you like, that are ever going to be receptive to the type of education that we put in front of them, and other people are going to have to be forced to change their habits, their habitual behaviors, the way that they interact with products, with services, with the world. And the way I believe we're going to arrive at that is by making things and investing in innovation that makes it as easy for them to do what they're doing already, just do it differently, and set new expectations, new paradigms of behavior based on the way in which we as organizations and as governments and all the rest of it can bring our things into the world, if you like. So.
Faith, what would you say?
Absolutely. I'm passionate about consumer engagement being a piece of new circular models, and I think that's how we're going to change behaviors. As Stephanie said, it has to be easy, it has to be something in it for me, the WIFM. So I just think, like with the fashion industry, for example, second largest polluter in the world after oil, but it's because people enjoy consuming clothing and with fast fashion. But if you look at the $20 billion that's in the secondhand market, that's being taken away by companies like the Riel. People are starting to say, well, we need some new models here. So maybe me as a fashion brand, I can now have a new business model that engages my consumer in a different way and says, okay, well, let's be a part of your digital closet, and let's enjoy that experience together, and you can give that clothing item back to us, and we can have someone else enjoy it and resell it, and we can engage you in that process, because it's all about the money. So if the consumer is making money as well on this consignment with that major brand, that where they're reselling the clothing item, then now there's the WIFM there.
Yeah, last year we had a panel here on the sharing economy, and we had somebody from Rent the Runway, who was one of our graduates. And I think it's a really interesting thing that millennials seem to be more interested in experiencing consumption rather than actually having to own all this stuff. And I think it's an interesting new model. What about in finance? How do we think about it there?
Well, it's about the right incentive structures, right? Because in a linear model, a company earns money by selling more and more products. So it's also in a twisted way incentivized to make sure that at a certain moment they break down or they become out of fashion. And with the product as a service model, you have the opposite. For example, what I mentioned in my opening speech, where Philips used to produce the product of light bulbs, now they sell product as the light as a service. So they're incentivized to make sure that it lasts longer, because then they don't have to replace it. They don't have to send in somebody to replace a bulb. It costs them less because they don't need to produce a second bulb. So I think there's something in it for the company because their profit model changed, and there's something in it for the client as well, because over time they don't have the upfront investment, and over time they probably pay the same, or at least not more.
I mean, the idea of new business models is interesting. I was also thinking about production processes themselves. Back in the 90s, I did a lot of work on total quality management, and in total quality management, you look at the production line to try to drive waste out of the process, not just material waste, but waste of labor and energy and everything else, because the idea is that by doing that, you become more competitive. Now, I held that against my own experience when I was a teenager working in a bicycle factory, and the foreman's philosophy was, in order to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. And we would run the assembly line, and we would have the redo bin, which is where the stuff that didn't make it, because we rushed too much, we threw it in that bin and we scavenged it for parts, but most of it ended up in the waste stream. So the mentality in production and in industry of, I don't care about it after it's used. In fact, I don't, even in the process of making it, I don't care about the breakage. It's just the cost of doing business. How do you attack that idea? Anybody?
Well, you can change the way in which you produce things to start with. So, we've had a sort of a cutout model, if you like, in our manufacturing, and by its very nature, there are byproducts in a production process where you've got offcuts of material and things like that. Just the sheer technological development that we're seeing in areas like 3D printing, for instance, there is inherently going to be less waste if we're going to be using technologies like 3D printing to actually model things from the outset, rather than having that cut-off waste around the edges. So that's just one way in which we can start to think about things from a totally different perspective, using the technologies available to us. So an open mind to how we produce things, I would say.
Anybody else want to get in on that?
I'll throw a little stat in there as well. And I don't know if there's anybody in from Caterpillar Foundation or Caterpillar. Yes? I know of them. Oh, you know of them. Okay. I think we're safe then with where I'm going with this. We're okay. But a few years ago, Caterpillar started taking back their extra heavy engines, so that the big traction engines you see in construction equipment, and they're refurbishing them, and they take it all apart, and the energy part that goes into an engine is in the casting of the engine itself. And casting metal is very wasteful, it's very labor intensive, it's very energy intensive, and it's actually not got a great success rate in terms of the fracture rate. They get a high fracture rate. So they retake the engines back and they refurbish them, and at the time the other manufacturers were like, that's crazy. They now make more money off the refurbing of the engines than they do off the selling of the new ones. And so that's a great example of, taking that would normally end up in a scrapyard somewhere and broken down for bits, which is also a circular piece, which I find quite interesting, that in the automotive world, scrapyards have been around for years and are probably one of the fundamental parts of circular economy in terms of taking that piece and using it somewhere else. But Caterpillar are doing it at a corporate level and making a lot of money out of it.
An interesting idea. Anybody else want to get in this?
Have leaders in your organization that are responsible for making sure there's circular design from the very beginning. So we have several circular leaders, but we have one over circular design that's challenging all of our R&D and our designers to say, okay, are we designing for circularity? And I know a lot of the laws coming out in Europe where you'll have to show how that product can be disassembled. that's an important piece as well. There's companies like Eileen Fisher, I know she designs for circularity, so you can take the pocket off the clothing. But I think really getting into that circular mindset in the beginning, not just at the end of its full life cycle.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps data will also help, right? As much more data comes available through data analytics, companies like the one you were mentioning, they will at some point start to think, hey, where's all that product left if we throw away through our processing half of it or 20% of it. They have to start thinking about their numbers and their bottom line.
Well, the good news is they went bankrupt because a company in Taiwan was able to underprice everything they made.
Competitiveness will
Right.
get you there, yeah.
Yes. No, I mean, if you think about waste as waste, and there's waste is basically being something that you can't sell and you don't put an economic value on, there is to the extent that your competitor is thinking this way, you're in trouble if you don't think this way. So there is that element. But I want to also turn this to the discussion of your business and the finance industry. I mean, what is the role of finance in bringing about the circular economy and bringing about sustainability more generally? So I'd like everybody to take we'll start with you because that's what you do.
I think finance has a role to play in society, right? We finance companies and we choose who to finance. I think ING has made a deliberate choice to not finance certain companies, but also really help the clients that we have through their transition to more sustainable models. So we do that by providing them financing for projects that improve their prediction processes, or by providing the KPI, there we go, it's a key performance indicator.
Okay, now we know what the acronym is.
Loans to incentivize them to improve their overall sustainability performance, and then they actually get a discount on their margin if you don't if you really believe me. So we have a different role to play. Obviously, we cannot steer innovation, but we can incentivize companies to move in that direction by financing those companies.
But capital flows toward either the highest rate of return or the most secure rate of return. So how does this help?
Well, I think on the circular economy, it's one topic where we started thinking very early on what role finance can play, because it's, I think Stephanie mentioned this already, it's a different way of an economic model. And the old way of thinking about financing, where you're financing against collateral, doesn't necessarily work anymore. So we have to think about how are we going to treat that. I'm not saying we have the answer yet, because it's still early stages, but we have started thinking about how can you finance a product as a service model, where are the risks, how do you account for it in your auditing statements. All those things need to be taken into account, and it's a new paradigm. So I'm not saying we have all the answers yet, but we're definitely at the forefront of thinking about it.
Faith, did you want to add to that?
I think it definitely helps your organization. I know Cisco's on, Barron's #1 sustainable company. And it's not just out of tech companies; it's globally. And other, vendors and partners and clients are interested in that. They're interested in partnering with companies that have high ethics and have sustainability and circularity goals as well, to do the right thing. Our CEO Chuck, he always says, you have to do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing.
Okay.
Which I think is something that has driven us. And I'd like to see a standard global circular score inside the quote-unquote Riel financial rating system. And I think once that's done, then that'll help as well. Because everybody says, oh, it's the nice thing to do, but if you think about it, it can also impact your financials too. So if you have an incident, it could severely affect your financials, and we've seen it happen in hours. So if you're doing the right thing, and for our environment, for our people, then it should help your overall financial, holistic, integrated reporting.
Okay. So Stephanie, you teach this to our students here in a course. what kind of reaction are you getting to this, and how are you bringing your corporate experience into the classroom, and what kind of response are you finding?
So the responses from students is interesting. There might even be some students, maybe they can talk up. But I think, it's part of the sustainability management program here at Columbia, and I think we've been trained for the period of time where sustainability has really been a discipline. We've been trained towards a thought process that says it's about reduction of something. It's about reducing our use of this, our impact on the environment, reduce. And it just doesn't sound super appealing and compelling. And that's why, sometimes in a role like many of us are playing, we're really butting up against attitudes of people who don't want to make those decisions to do less of things or to use less things. So I guess the best analogy I can come up with for circular economy is it's like trying to choose between going on a diet or choosing a healthy lifestyle, right? So a diet is all about cutting back on what you're eating less all the time. Whereas a healthy lifestyle, you're looking holistically at what you're doing and making improvements to your life system so that you make that more sustainable overall. So the end game may be sustainability of our planet and even our industries and our companies and so on. But it's just a reframing of how we think about that sustainability approach. And I think the response from students is actually quite remarkable. So, to take a step back from thinking about it as doing less and actually thinking about the opportunities that exist when you reframe your thinking that way. So that has been, the response. And I suppose what I can bring from corporate experience is a good dose of reality into the classroom, because we can all be the best of idealists at times, but every day in the corporate world is a lesson in making friends and influencing people, basically. So and we all need to do that, right? So and in the classroom, the way that comes to life is I force the students to work in groups. Some of them don't like it one bit, but they're using their interdisciplinary skill sets. They're forced to work together, which is a reality. Even companies that are competitors these days are having to work together to solve supply chain issues and so on. So really, it's a dose of what the real world is going to feel like if they want to go and practice this kind of thinking. So. Okay.
Tom, I wanted to tap into your expertise in the built environment. I mean, because when we think about building something, it's usually something that wasn't there before.
Right.
And so how do these circular economy concepts come into the built environment in your world?
So there's a number of ways we've been looking at it. And you mentioned before about printing, 3D printing. We've actually started 3D printing structural connections that are, if you have a structural building, they're immensely intricate and they require casting and special work, and again, a bit like the engines, they're incredibly wasteful. But if you print them, you can manage everything along the process, including the mixture of metals in the printing, which is incredibly useful. So that's one piece that we do, and we invest a lot of money in our own research to see how this might happen. So we took a project, just a highways project, which is, you look at it from a building perspective, it's fairly low tech. There's not much to it, but we looked at it from can we save materials? And so the reuse of all materials of wherever you were going through, whether it was rebuilding or replacing or building through an open area, of taking all the materials that were generated in that slice and reusing every single one of them in some fashion along that route. And then taking everything as we're building it and modularizing it, not in terms of precast, but saying, okay, well, we know the carpenter comes in with an 8-foot by 4-foot piece of plywood. Let's not make the formwork for the bridge 7'6", because that's a waste. So we sort of modularized everything to what was common in the environment, and we saw quite a lot of savings. And I haven't got the slide with me that I normally cheat now and put it up that gives you the data, but the saving 1% of the top 1% of materials has an impact on the project overall. And the numbers that we sort of came through, you scale that up to the US economy alone at $15 trillion over the next 10 years or 15 years. That's an awful lot of money alone that the construction industry, who are money hogs, are waking up to and saying, oh, I get that now. Now you're talking my language. And so helping them to understand it means everything from when you buy material that you're transporting across from wherever, only the material that you're going to use. You're not going to have carting off costs. You're not going to have bonfires to get rid of your excess timber or bury it under the earthworks embankment, which is more common than you'd care to imagine. So all of these things sort of tie in, but it comes down to understanding what your product is that you're doing. And I think it's the same as product. I just happen to be an engineer with a built environment product. It's understanding your product right across the value chain. Where do the materials come from? How are they made? How are they sort of put together when you get them? What do they do? Can you do that better? How do you dismantle it? How do you sell it on? How do you move it forward? So we're looking at buildings as a materials bank. Okay. And so rather than sort of put it in and say, okay, that's steel beam, it's in, we don't have to worry about, we tag it. So through a digital model, we tag it and we say we know the size, the length, the weight per foot, all of the dimensions of it in terms of the cross-section and the long section. And when we come to use that again, we can say, okay, when we're dismantling this, we can sell that on because we know the properties. Now, code doesn't allow us to sell it to do the same thing as when we put it in, but we can say, well, if you made it just a little bit shorter and you did something else, you can still use that at 90% of its load. So there's a way to use it, not quite the same way you had, but you're sort of, rubbing it up and selling it on to do a job. And again, if it's steel, then steel, a beam, is 50 times more valuable than the iron ore that goes into it. So there's an inherent value in doing that as well. So that's one way. But and I don't want to hog this, but you're kind of running me on now. But the other part of that is that there's a difficult bit for building owners and developers in so much. You're asking about the financial world first, and I'm not pointing the finger by any stretch. But if you build a building as a developer, to have a facade on that building that's owned by somebody else gives you difficult problems on your pro forma because you don't own it. But more than that, you don't own the insurance for it either. So somebody else is responsible for it. So now you've got a building that your construction cost is less, but that doesn't stack up on your pro forma then against what the rest of the economics of the building is, which gives the financial world some head-scratching moments about how that works. But it's also, how do you insure that as a building? And who takes responsibility? Okay.
Well, we unfortunately are at the end of our time. What I'm going to ask is for each panelist to give me a concluding thought about the circular economy, something that you wanted to say tonight, but you haven't gotten a chance to. And we'll start with you, and I'll conclude with what I haven't had a chance to say, other than thank you. So, Anne, please.
Well, I think you ultimately need to think about this as an opportunity, right? We are at the moment that we know we need to make changes, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to get this right. So if we all collectively think about that, I think we are heading in the right direction.
Okay.
I'd like to ask you all to join me globally in creating a digital product passport so that we know, what's been said here. We need to know what's in it, where it came from, how it was made, and how it can be disassembled.
Stephanie?
I think I would say we're all in the habit of accepting things for what they are and how they work for us and for everyone else. But if we took a step back from every single thing and put a circular economy thought lens, give it a moment, we could really reimagine almost anything that we're doing in a way that improves the resource productivity and moves it more towards a circular way of thinking. So.
Tom?
So other than totally stealing your line on it's not a diet, it's a way of life, then I'm totally going to steal that next time. That's awesome. I think I would say not this way, but this way. Don't wait for people to tell you how to do things. Go out and research it. The internet is a wonderful place, and if you start, JC's not there anymore. If you start with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, they have an amazing amount of information, factual data, things that make you think, things you can take back to your corporate and your home life and say, how can I do things better? Start with you, and then start to influence others.
Well, before thanking the panelists, let me give my last thought on this, which is that this is a very important concept for the field of sustainability. The concept and the idea of trying to figure out how do we close the loop on production and consumption is one we've been working on for a while. And I want to give some optimism here, because in my lifetime I've seen improvements in all of these areas, and particularly people are thinking about this. And I think that's extremely important. So I want to first, please join me in thanking the panelists.